shot through the head. Chapter 9. Atlanta's Most Unpopular Couple. Scarlett sat in her bedroom drinking brandy and feeling sorry for things that she had done. She wondered if everyone in the town thought that she had killed Frank. People at the funeral that day had been cool with her, but she didn't care. Somebody knocked on the door downstairs, and she heard Aunt Pitty open it. Then came the voice of Rhett Butler, and she knew that he was the one person she did want to see tonight. "I'm going away tomorrow, and will be away some time," he was saying to Aunt Pitty. "It's very important that I see her." "Oh, but I don't think... not today," Aunt Pitty began. Scarlett ran to the top of the stairs. "I'll be down in a moment, Rhett," she called, and saw Aunt Pitty's surprised and shocked face looking up at her. They talked together in the library, behind closed doors. Scarlett did not want Aunt Pitty to know about her drinking, but it was almost the first thing Rhett noticed. "Brandy," he said, "and you've been drinking a lot of it." "What if I have?" she said. "It's a bad thing to drink alone, Scarlett," said Rhett. "What's the matter? It's more than just old Frank dying." "Oh, Rhett, I was wrong to marry Frank. He loved Sue Ellen, but I lied and told him she was going to marry Tony Fontaine." "So that's how it happened," said Rhett. "I often wondered, but he didn't have to marry you. Are you sorry you still own Tara, and that you aren't poor and hungry?" "No." "No, of course you aren't," said Rhett. "It's the brandy that's making you feel sorry for yourself." "How dare you!" began Scarlett. "I'm going to England, and I may be away for months." He smiled. "I still want you more than any other woman, Scarlett, and now Frank is gone, I thought you ought to know it." "Oh!" she cried. "You are the rudest! And on the day of Frank's funeral! Will you please leave this house?" "Listen," he said calmly. "I'm asking you to marry me." "Is this one of your bad jokes?" she said angrily. "It's no joke," he said. "I'm afraid that if I wait until I come back, you'll be married to some other man who has a little money. I can't go on waiting to catch you between husbands, Scarlett." But Rhett, I don't love you," she said. "That wasn't important when you married before," he said. "What's really stopping you? Tell me." Suddenly she thought of Ashley. "It's because of him that I don't want to marry again," she thought. "I belong to Ashley and Tara, forever." She did not know that her thoughts brought a look of softness to her face, which Rhett immediately understood. He became angry. "Scarlett O'Hara, you're a fool." And then his arms were round her, and he was kissing her, softly at first, and then violently, so that before she knew it, she was kissing him back. "Stop! Please! I'm faint," she whispered after a moment. None of the fools you've known have kissed you like this, have they? He said. Charles or Frank or your stupid Ashley. What did they know about you? I know you. His mouth was on hers again. Then he said, Say yes. Say yes, or... She whispered, Yes, and felt a sudden calm come over her. He looked down at her. You mean it? Yes, she said again. Why? He said, suddenly uncertain. Is it my money? Red, what a question! Don't try to sweet-talk me. I'm not Charles or Frank, he said. Is it my money? Well, money does help, you know, she said. And I am fond of you, Red. But if I said I loved you, I would be lying, and you would know it. He looked at her and laughed, but it was not a pleasant laugh. All right, he said. What shall I bring you back from England? A ring? What kind do you want? Oh, a diamond ring, Red, said Scarlet, and buy a great big one. The ring Rhett brought back from England was so large that it embarrassed Scarlet to wear it. But only when it was on her finger did she tell everyone that she was going to marry him. They became Atlanta's most unpopular couple, except for Yankees and carpetbaggers. Everyone blamed Scarlet for Frank's death, and for putting the lives of other men in danger. And they hated Rhett for using Belle Watling, a prostitute, to save their men from the Yankee prisons. They were sure he did it on purpose, just to embarrass them. Only Melanie was loyal to Scarlet, and reminded people how Scarlet had helped her and her family when they had no home. Those of you who do not visit Scarlet, she told the ladies of Atlanta, need never, never visit me. Rhett took Scarlet to New Orleans after they were married, and he kept her too busy to think of Ashley very often. But sometimes, when she lay in Rhett's arms with the moonlight shining across the bed, she thought how perfect life could be if only it was Ashley's arms that held her so closely. They stayed at the National Hotel in Atlanta while a house was built for them. There were many new people, as old Atlanteans called them, staying there, also waiting for their homes to be completed, and Scarlet found them pleasant and exciting to be with. They were rich and well-dressed, and never talked about the war or hard times. Her house was the biggest and most fashionable in Atlanta. Rhett gave her anything she wanted, and listened to her talk about the shop, her sawmills, the convicts, and the cost of feeding them, and gave her good, sensible advice. He never talked about having children, as Charles and Frank had done. But then Scarlet learned that she was going to have another baby, and told the news to Rhett. "I won't have it!" she screamed. "A woman doesn't have to have children if she doesn't want them. There are things—" "Scarlet, you haven't done anything," he shouted. "I don't care if you have 1 child or 20. but I do care if you die." He held her close. "I don't want children any more than you do, but I don't want to hear any more foolish talk." Scarlet's baby was named Eugenie Victoria, but Melanie called her Bonnie, and she was always called this afterwards. When Scarlet was able to visit the sawmills again, she found that Ashley's was not doing well. "Ashley, you're too soft-hearted," she said. "You ought to get more work out of the convicts. They only have to tell you they're sick and they stay away from work. That's no way to make money. A couple of knocks with a stick will—" "Scarlet, stop!" cried Ashley. "Don't you realize they are men? Some of them sick and weak and— Oh, my dear, when I see the way he's hardened you, you who were always so sweet." "Who has hardened me?" "Rhett Butler. Everything he touches he poisons. I know he saved my life, and I'm grateful, but I wish it had been any man but him. And when I think of him touching you, He's going to kiss me," thought Scarlet happily. But he stepped back, as if realizing he had said too much. "I'm very sorry, Scarlet," he said. "I mustn't say these things. I have no excuse except no excuse at all." All the way home in the carriage, Scarlet thought of his words. No excuse at all, except that he loved her and did not want to think of her lying in Rhett's arms. Well, in future she would live without those arms. The idea pleased her, and it would mean that she would not have to have any more children. But how could she let Ashley know what she'd done for him? "I wish I could talk to Ashley as easily as I can talk to Rhett," she thought. "But I'll let him know somehow. Of course, it will be difficult telling Rhett I want separate bedrooms." But it was not as difficult as she thought. He gave her a long, cool look when she told him. "Scarlet," he said, "if you and your bed still held any charms for me, locked doors would not keep me away. But fortunately, the world is full of beds, and most of the beds are full of women." "You mean you'll—" "Of course," he said. "It's surprising I haven't taken advantage of one of them before." "I shall lock my door every night," said Scarlet. "Why? If I wanted you, no lock could keep me out." Chapter 10. A Surprise Party. It was Ashley's birthday, and Melanie was giving him a surprise party. Everyone knew except Ashley. That morning, Scarlet, Melanie, India, and Aunt Pitty were getting things ready. "If you're going to the sawmill," Melanie asked Scarlet, "can you keep Ashley busy until 5 o'clock? If he comes home earlier, he'll catch us finishing cakes or something." Scarlet was always happy to be alone with Ashley. "Yes," she said, but she saw India look quickly at her. "She always looks strangely at me if I speak of Ashley," thought Scarlet. "Keep him there for as long as you can after 5 o'clock, said Melanie. "Then India will drive down in the carriage and pick him up. And, Scarlet, come early tonight." As Scarlet rode home, she thought, "She wants me to come early, but she doesn't want me to welcome guests with her and India and Aunt Pitty. And I wanted to stand next to Ashley and welcome guests with him. Why wasn't I asked?" Rhett knew the answer and told her. "A Yankee lover welcoming people when all those important Confederate lovers are going to be there? Don't be silly, my dear. It's only because of loyal Melanie that you're invited at all." Scarlet dressed with more care than usual for her trip to the shop and the sawmill that afternoon, and Ashley was surprised to see her at the office. There was almost a smile on his face when he welcomed her. "Scarlet," he said, "why aren't you at my house helping Melanie to get ready for the surprise party?" "Ashley!" cried Scarlet. "You aren't supposed to know." "Oh, I'll be the most surprised man in Atlanta," said Ashley, with laughter in his eyes. "Who told you?" she asked. "Almost every man who is invited, and who has ever had a surprise party given to him," said Ashley, and Scarlet had to smile. He took her hands, spreading them wide so that he could look at her dress. "Oh, Scarlet, you get prettier all the time." But as he touched her, she realized for the first time ever that it did not excite her. How strange, she thought. "I'll always remember you as you were on that day at 12 Oaks," he said. "You were wearing a white dress covered with little green flowers, sitting under a tree with a dozen boys round you." He dropped her hands, and the light went out of his eyes. "We've come a long way since then, Scarlet. You've come straight and quick, but I've come slowly. And without you, and all you've done for me, I'd be nothing now." "Oh, Ashley, you sound so sad," cried Scarlet. "No, I'm not sad any more," he said. He stopped, but suddenly Scarlet knew what he was thinking. "You're not sad," she thought. "You've just lost hope." "Ashley, what do you want?" she asked him. "I don't know," he said. "Perhaps I want the old days back again. The memory of them never seems to go away." His voice and the way he spoke brought those memories back to her, and it hurt to think of them. "I like these days better," she said, but did not look at him when she spoke. He laughed softly, put his hand under her chin, and lifted her face up to his. "Oh, Scarlet, what a poor liar you are." He made her remember things she wanted to forget, the beauty, the charm of the old days. "I mustn't let him make me look back," she thought. "It hurts too much. That's what's wrong with Ashley. He's afraid of the future, so he looks back. Oh, Ashley, my love, you mustn't look back." She remembered the Scarlett O'Hara who loved pretty dresses and charming young men. Without warning, tears came into her eyes and began to fall down her cheeks, and she looked up at Ashley like a small, lost child. He took her gently in his arms, pressed her head against his shoulder, and put his cheek next to hers. Like a loved friend, but not a lover. She heard the sound of someone outside, and suddenly he pushed himself away from her. She looked up at him, but he was not looking at her. He was looking over her shoulder. She turned, and there stood India, her face white and her eyes filled with anger. Archie was with her, and with them stood Mrs. Elsing. Scarlet never remembered how she got out of the office. Shame and fear hurried her home to her empty house. It was silent in the April sunshine. The Negroes were at a funeral, and the children were playing in Melanie's garden. Melanie! Melanie would hear of this. Scarlet went cold at the thought as she went up to her room. The news would be all over town by supper time, and people would believe that she and Ashley were lovers. And it had been so innocent, so sweet. Scarlet burst into tears when she thought of the hurt in Melanie's eyes when India told her. What will Melanie do, she thought. Will she leave Ashley? And what will Rhett do? Scarlet pulled off her clothes and lay down on the bed. I won't think of it now. I'll think of it later. She heard the Negroes come back later. Mammy knocked on her door, but Scarlet sent her away, saying that she didn't want any supper. Then, after a long time, Rhett knocked on her door, and she said, "Come in." "Are you ready for the party?" he said. It was dark, and she could not see his face. I have a bad head," she said. "I don't think I'll go." There was a long pause before he replied. "What a cowardly little cat you are!" And his voice was hard and cruel. He knew. She lay shaking, unable to speak. He lit the candle next to her bed and looked down at her, and she saw that he was dressed in evening clothes. "Get up," he said. "We're going to the party." "Oh, Rhett, I can't. I won't go until—" "If you don't show your face tonight, you'll never be able to show it in this town as long as you live," he told her. "And I won't have a coward for a wife. Get your clothes on." Lights were on in every room of Melanie's house, and Scarlet could hear the music far up the street. Rhett held her arm roughly and walked with her to the door. "I'll face them," she thought. "I don't care what they say or what they think. Only Melanie. Only Melanie." The music stopped as they entered, and the room slowly became silent. Scarlet lifted her chin and made herself smile. Then someone came hurrying through the crowd. Melanie went immediately to Scarlet's side and put an arm round her waist. "What a lovely dress, my dear," she said in her small, clear voice. "India couldn't come tonight. Will you welcome our guests with me?" Chapter 11. Wonderful and Wild. Rhett sent Scarlet home from the party alone, and she went to her room. Oh, how awful it had been. She could not forget Ashley's face, full of shame. "Will he hate me now?" she thought. "Now that Melanie's love has saved us both? Melanie, who will always believe we were innocent." Scarlet got herself ready for bed, then went downstairs to get herself a drink. There was a light in the dining room. Red must have come in quietly and not gone to Belle Watling's, she thought. I'll go without my brandy, then I won't have to see him, and I'll lock the door of my room. But the dining room door opened, and Rhett was standing there with a candle. "Do come and have your drink, Mrs. Butler," he said. And she saw that he was very drunk. "I don't want a drink. I heard a noise." "You heard nothing," he said. "Come here." Scarlet went down to the dining room. "Sit down," he told her. Always before, life had seemed to be a joke to him, but now Scarlet saw that something mattered to him, and it mattered very much. He poured out a glass of brandy and put it in her hand. "You're wondering if Miss Melanie knows all about you and Ashley. Well, someone told her, but she didn't believe it. I don't know what lie Ashley Wilkes told her, but any lie would do, for she loves him and she loves you. If you weren't so drunk, You locked me out of your bedroom because you didn't want me or my children," he shouted. "And all the time you were wanting Ashley Wilkes. Oh, how that hurt." She drank her brandy and stood up. "You don't understand Ashley or me, and you're jealous of something you can't understand." She turned and walked towards the door, but he came across the room and held her against the wall. "I'm sorry for you, my pretty little fool," he told her. "If I was dead, and Miss Melanie was dead, and you had Ashley, do you think you could be happy with him? Hell no! You would never know what he was thinking about. You would never understand his books or his music. But we, my dear wife, understand each other. I loved you, and I know you, and I want you." Suddenly, he lifted her off her feet and into his arms, and began to climb the stairs. "And this is one night you will not turn me out of your room." She screamed, but he kissed her so violently that everything was pushed from her mind, and then her arms were round his neck, and her lips were shaking under his. When Scarlet woke up the next morning, he was gone. But she remembered the wild and wonderful night. Rhett did not appear for dinner or for supper, and when the second day passed without news of him, she was disappointed and afraid. Had he been in an accident? After the second night, she decided to go to the police. But as she finished her breakfast in her room, she heard his feet on the stairs. "Oh, hello," he said, coming in. Where have you been?" she asked. "Don't you know? I thought the whole town knew, after the police called at Belle's the night before last." "Belle's? You've been with that woman?" "Of course," he said. "I hope you didn't worry about me." "You went to her from me after... "Oh, that," he said carelessly. "I'm sorry for the way I behaved at our last meeting, Scarlet. I was very drunk." She wanted to cry. "He just used me when he was drunk, like he does the women in Belle's house," she thought. "Get out," she told him. "Don't worry. I'm going," he said. "I just came to say that I'm going to Charleston and New Orleans and, a very long trip. I'm leaving today, and I'm taking Bonnie with me. Get Prissy to pack her little things. I'll take Prissy, too." "You'll never take my child out of this house," she said. "My child, too, Mrs. Butler. Have her packed and ready in an hour, or what happened the other night will be nothing compared to what will happen," he said, his voice cold. He was gone for 3 months, and, during that time, Scarlett learned that she was going to have another baby, the result of that wild night with Rhett, which still filled her with shame. But for the first time, she was glad, because now she had the time and the money for a child. Rhett returned without warning. One day Scarlett heard Bonnie cry, "Mother!" and hurried from her room to the top of the stairs, where Bonnie threw herself into Scarlett's arms. Rhett was at the bottom. He looked up at her with his dark eyes, and suddenly she was just glad that he was home. "Where's Mammy?" asked Bonnie, and Scarlett let her go. She watched Rhett come up the stairs and wondered if he would kiss her, but he did not. "You don't look well, Mrs. Butler," he said in a careless voice. "Does this mean that you've missed me?" It made her angry, this careless way of his. She hadn't wanted to tell him like this, but now the words rushed to her lips. "It's because I'm going to have a baby," she said. He looked surprised and moved towards her, as if he was going to put a hand on her arm. Scarlett turned away from him with hate in her eyes, and his face hardened. "And who's the happy father?" he said coolly. "Ashley?" Her voice shook with anger. "You know it's yours, but I don't want it any more than you do. No woman would want the baby of a man like you. I wish it was anybody's but yours." She stepped forward to tear his face with her fingernails, but he moved to one side quickly. Scarlett missed him and fell, over and over, to the bottom of the stairs. Chapter 12. A Secret Plan. Scarlett lost the baby and almost died. Every time Melanie came out of Scarlett's room, she saw Rhett sitting on his bed, his door wide open, watching his wife's room. And when at last she was able to tell him that Scarlett was better, he put his head in his hands and began to cry. Melanie had never seen a man cry before, and it frightened her, but she closed the door softly and went to him. And when she put her hand on his shoulder, his arms went round her, and before she knew it, she was sitting on the bed and he was sitting on the floor with his head on her knees. He began to talk wildly, telling Melanie things that made her cheeks go hot with embarrassment. "Captain Butler, you must not tell me these things," she said. "You don't understand," he cried. "She didn't want a baby. We hadn't slept together." "Captain Butler, You mustn't say—" "I was drunk, and I wanted to hurt her." Melanie looked at him. Is it possible that he heard and believed the terrible lie about Ashley and Scarlett and was jealous? She thought suddenly. No, he's too sensible. He's drunk, and his mind is running wild. "You can't understand," he said. "You're too good to understand. I was crazy with jealousy. She doesn't love me. She never has. She loves—" He stopped as his drunken eyes met hers, and he realized who he was talking to. "If I told you, you wouldn't believe me, would you?" "No," said Melanie softly. She began gently to smooth his hair. "Don't cry, Captain Butler. She's going to get well." A month later, Rhett put Scarlett on the train to Jonesboro with Wade, Ella, and Prissy. Then he rode to Melanie's house, where she was sitting outside. "Scarlett has gone to Tara," she said. "Yes," he said, smiling. "Tara will do her more good than all of Dr. Meade's medicines. But I'm worried about her health, because she tries to do too much." "Yes, she does," agreed Melanie. "That's why I want Mr. Wilkes to buy her half in the sawmills," said Rhett. "I know she'll sell to him." "Oh," said Melanie, "that would be nice, but—" "Miss Melanie, I want to lend you the money," said Rhett. "That's kind of you, but we may never be able to pay—" "I don't want you to pay it back," he said. "I'll just be glad to know that Scarlett isn't making herself ill. The shop will be enough to keep her busy and happy. Do you understand?" "Well, yes, but—" said Melanie uncertainly. "You want to buy your son a horse, don't you? And you want him to go to a good university? And to Europe?" he said. "Oh, of course," cried Melanie. "But everyone is so poor." "Mr. Wilkes could make a lot of money out of the sawmills one day," said Rhett. "Will you do it? To help Scarlett?" "You know I'll do anything in the world for her," said Melanie. "She's done so much for me. But my husband—" "If I send the money to Mr. Wilkes without telling him who has sent it, will you see that he uses it to buy the sawmills?" said Rhett. "It must be our secret." Melanie was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, and Scarlett's lucky to have a husband who is so nice to her." Scarlett came back from Tara looking much healthier and full of news. She asked, "Has anything happened here?" "Ashley wanted to know if I thought you'd sell him your sawmill, and the half part you have in his," said Rhett. Scarlett looked surprised. "Where did Ashley get the money?" "It seems that it came from someone he nursed with typhoid at Rock Island," said Rhett. "It came with an unsigned letter from Washington. Of course, I told him you wouldn't sell. I told him that you enjoyed telling other people what to do." "Let me look after my own business," she said angrily. And I will sell them to him." Until that moment, Scarlett had never intended to sell her sawmills. but Rhett made her angry by speaking about her that way, and to Ashley of all people. So that same night she sold the sawmills, and then wished that she hadn't. Chapter 13. 2 Deaths. When Bonnie was 4, Rhett bought her a horse and taught her to ride. The two of them were often seen riding together. Then Rhett decided that the time had come for her to learn to jump, and he built a low gate in the back garden. Bonnie jumped the low gate easily, and Scarlet could not help laughing at Rhett, who looked so proud. After the first week of jumping, Bonnie wanted the gate to be higher. "The horse's legs aren't long enough," Rhett told her. "They are! They are!" said Bonnie. "I jumped Aunt Melanie's fence, and that's very high." "Oh, all right," said Rhett, laughing. "But if you fall off, don't blame me." He made the gate higher, and Bonnie called to her mother, "Mother, watch me jump this one." "I'm watching, dear," said Scarlet, smiling. Watch me jump this one. There was something about those words. What was it? Scarlet looked at her small daughter as Bonnie rushed towards the gate, her blue eyes full of excitement. "They're like Pa's eyes," thought Scarlet. And then she remembered. She heard her father's voice. "Ellen, watch me jump this one." "No!" cried Scarlet. "No! Oh, Bonnie, stop!" But there was the terrible sound of breaking wood, and a cry from Rhett. Then Scarlet saw the horse running off without its rider. Bonnie died from a broken neck. 3 nights later, Mammy went to Melanie's house. "Miss Melanie," said Mammy, "Mr. Rhett won't let us take that poor child, and there's the funeral tomorrow." "Won't let you take her?" said Melanie. "He put her in his room and told me to bring lots of lights and not to close the curtains. Don't you know that Miss Bonnie is afraid of the dark?" he says. "So I get him a dozen candles, and he says, 'Get out,' and he locks the door. And that's the way it's been for 2 days. He won't open it for Miss Scarlet or anybody. And he won't say nothing about the funeral. You've got to help us. He'll listen to you." The thought of arguing with Captain Butler while he was half crazy with sadness made Melanie go cold, but she followed Mammy to Scarlet's house and went quickly up the stairs. "Please let me come in, Captain Butler," she said softly. "It's Mrs. Wilkes. I want to see Bonnie." The door opened, and Mammy smelled brandy on Rhett's breath as he took Melanie's arm and pulled her inside. Then she sat outside, crying and praying. After a long, long time, the door opened, and Melanie's head appeared. She looked tired, and there were tears in her eyes. "Go and tell Miss Scarlet that Captain Butler is willing to have the funeral tomorrow morning," she said. After Bonnie died, Rhett did not often come home. but when he did, he was usually drunk. Scarlet could not be angry with him or blame him for Bonnie's death any more. Nothing seemed to matter to her now. She was lonely and unhappy and afraid. There was no one to talk to. Even Mammy had gone back to Tara. "He loved that child," Dr. Meade told her, "and he drinks to forget her. Have another baby as quickly as you can." But Rhett did not seem to want any more children. He never came to her bedroom, even though she left the door open now. Scarlet was away from Atlanta for a few days when Rhett's message came. "Mrs. Wilkes is ill. Come home immediately." Rhett was waiting for her at the station with the carriage. "She's dying, and she wants to see you," he said. "Not Melanie! Oh, not Melanie! What happened?" "She lost the baby she was going to have," said Rhett. "I didn't know she was going to have a baby." "She didn't tell anyone," he said. "Dr. Meade said it would kill her to have another baby." "It has killed her," said Rhett. "But, Rhett, she can't be dying. I didn't when I—" "She isn't as strong as you," he said. The carriage stopped outside Melanie's house. "Are you coming in?" said Scarlet. "No," he said. She ran inside. Ashley, Aunt Pitty, and India were there. "She asked for you," Ashley told her. The door of Melanie's room opened quietly, and Dr. Meade came out. "Come with me," he said to Scarlet. He whispered, "Miss Melanie is going to die peacefully, and you aren't going to tell her anything about Ashley. Do you understand?" She went into the room where Melanie lay in bed with her eyes closed. Her face was a deathly yellow. Scarlet stared at her, and knew then that Melanie was dying. She had hoped Dr. Meade was wrong, but now she knew. "I need her," she thought, and it was true. Suddenly, Scarlet realized how much she needed Melanie, had always needed her. Loyal Melanie, who was always there, loving her, fighting for her. She held Melanie's hand. "It's me, Melanie," she said. Melanie's eyes opened for a second. Then they closed again. After a pause, she said, "Promise me." "Oh, anything," cried Scarlet. "My son, Bo, look after him. I give him to you." "I promise," said Scarlet. There was a pause before Melanie's whisper came again. "Ashley," she said. "Ashley and you." Scarlet went cold. Melanie had known all the time. She dropped her head onto the bed and began to cry. "Ashley," Melanie said again, and her fingers reached out to touch Scarlet's head. Scarlet looked up into Melanie's eyes and saw no blame, only the fight for breath to speak. "Thank God," she thought. She doesn't know. "What about Ashley, Melanie?" said Scarlet. "You'll look after him," whispered Melanie. "Oh, yes," said Scarlet. "I'll look after him. But don't ever let him know." "No," said Scarlet. "I'll just suggest things to him." Melanie was able to smile. And so the care of Ashley Wilkes was passed from one woman to another, without him ever knowing. But now the fight went out of Melanie's tired face, as if with Scarlet's promise, peace had come to her. "Oh, you're so clever, so brave, always been good to me." At these words, it was Scarlet's turn to fight. Against the tears that were coming into her eyes, she could not speak. Dr. Meade opened the door, and Scarlet put Melanie's hand against her cheek. "Good night," she said. "Captain Butler," came the whisper, very softly now. "Be kind to him. He loves you so much." Then India and Aunt Pitty followed the doctor into the room as Scarlet went outside. She was the only woman except Mother who ever loved me, thought Scarlet. She found Ashley in his room. He looked at her, and she saw fear and confusion in his eyes. "What will I do?" he said. "I can't live without her." She stared at him, feeling that she understood him for the first time in her life. "You really love her, don't you? Oh, you've been a fool, Ashley. Why didn't you see that you only wanted me like Rhett wants that Watling woman?" And then she saw the hurt look in his eyes, and remembered her promise to Melanie to look after him. "Forgive me," she said. He came to her quickly, and his arms went round her. "Don't cry, my dear," she said. "You must be brave." A door opened and someone called, "Ashley, quick!" "Hurry," said Scarlet, and pushed him out of the room. I never saw what he really was, she thought. Only what I wanted him to be. What a fool I've been. Now Melanie is dead, and I've got him to look after like a child. Oh, if I hadn't promised her, I wouldn't care if I never saw him again. Chapter 14. Tomorrow. Home. That was where she wanted to be. Home with Rhett. Rhett with his strong arms to hold her. Rhett who loved her. Melanie had known this, and with her last breath had said, "Be kind to him." I love him, Scarlet thought. I don't know how long I've loved him, but it's true. Rhett's loved me all the time, and I've been so nasty to him. But I'll tell him I've been a fool, and he'll understand. He always has. She found him in the dining room at home. "Is Miss Melanie dead?" he asked. Scarlet nodded, suddenly afraid that it may be too late. "She was the only completely kind person I ever knew," he said. "A very great lady." Then his voice changed. "So that makes it nice for you, doesn't it?" "Oh, how can you say that?" cried Scarlet, tears coming into her eyes. "You know how I loved her, and her last words were about you." He looked at her. "What did she say?" "Oh, not now, Rhett." "Tell me," he said. His voice was cool, but the hand he put on her wrist hurt. "She said, 'Be kind to Captain Butler. He loves you so much,'" Scarlet told him. He stared at her and dropped her wrist. Suddenly he walked across to the window. "Is that all she said?" "She said, Ashley. She asked me to look after Ashley." He was silent for a moment, and then he laughed softly. "How nice for you," he said. "Miss Melanie is dead, and you can leave me and go to Ashley, and all your dreams can come true." "Leave you?" she cried. "No! No!" She ran to him and held his arm. "Oh, you're wrong! I don't want to leave you. She stopped, unable to find the right words. "You're tired," he said. "You'd better go to bed." "But I must tell you," she cried. "Scarlet," he said heavily, "I don't want to hear." "But you don't know what I am going to say." "My dear, it's written plainly on your face," he said. "Something made you realize that you don't love the unfortunate Mr. Wilkes after all. And that same something made me seem more attractive suddenly." He shook his head. "But it's useless to talk about it." "But, Rhett," she said, "oh, I love you so much. I was a fool not to know it. Rhett, you must believe me." "Oh, I believe you," he said. "And did you ever know that I loved you as much as a man can love a woman? But I couldn't let you know it. You're so cruel to those who love you, Scarlet. I knew you didn't love me when you married me, but I was a fool and thought I could make you care. I wanted to make you happy, the way I made Bonnie happy. But there was always Ashley. Every night I sat across the table from you and knew that you were wishing Ashley was sitting in my place. But then Bonnie came, and she was like you, brave and pretty and full of life, and I gave her the love that you didn't want. But when she died, she took everything." "Rhett, there can be other babies." "Thank you, no," he said. "But Rhett—" "I'm going away," he said. "I'll come back often enough to stop people saying that your husband has left you, if that worries you. But I'm going away." "Let me come with you." "No," he said. Where? Where will you go? She said. Perhaps to England or Paris. But if you go, what will I do? She cried. He looked at her, and there was pity in his eyes. My dear, he said softly, I don't care what you do. She watched him go out of the room, and knew that he was the last thing in her world that mattered. She had never understood either him or Ashley, the two men she had loved, and now she had lost them both. I won't think of it now, she told herself. I'll go crazy if I think of it now. She tried to find some way of stopping the pain. I'll go home to Tara tomorrow, she thought. Yes! Tara. She could see the white house, waiting to welcome her through the red autumn leaves. She could see the red earth of the fields and the dark beauty of the trees on the hills. And Mammy would be there. Suddenly, she wanted Mammy the way she had wanted her when she was a little girl. Scarlet lifted her chin. She could get Rhett back. There was no man she couldn't get if she really wanted him. I'll think of it tomorrow at Tara, she told herself, because tomorrow is another day.